Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us either on Zoom or on Twitch. Really appreciate everyone joining us for another another month of .NET greatness. So a couple of quick slides, and I'm gonna hand it over to what you're really here for. So first, there we go. First, I want to to thank our sponsors. Even with no food and that type of stuff, there are still things we need, to keep this thing running. So really appreciate everyone who's always been a part of this. Green Events Technology was my company that technically pays for everything nowadays. We actually are being co-hosted by the .NET Foundation, so we have that, and then Modus and Tech Systems, who are our long-term sponsors. And sure enough, I want to give Modus just a moment to say a couple things.
I think I'm the singular Modus representative today.
Yep.
And
I'm with you.
Oh, yay. Brooke, you were hiding. I feel like we're in high school because everyone I hear doesn't turn their cams on if they have high school education going on. Anyway, me and Brooke are recruiters for Modus. I think almost all of you know what recruiters do because you've probably been contacted by 1 or 10 billion in your life. But we work here in Louisville primarily with tech roles and different roles within different languages or expectations. So we're aware that there's a lot going on in employment and shifts and changes going on throughout everyone's budgetary situation. So we're always here to be a point of reference or just a conversation, or at least get that dialogue going to start seeing where we might be able to open doors. If any way you want to talk to us, whether it be you are actively looking, you're passively looking, you just want to get that conversation started, you want to know what your resume looks like, myself, Brooke, and then our colleague, Stephanie are all recruiters and here to touch base at any time. And I apologize for the weird coloring. My lights don't really work. And if I went in the living room, you guys would have to hear Adventure Time. And while that is entertaining, I don't want to distract. So I appreciate you guys giving me a chance to say hello. And Chad, even though we couldn't buy the pizza, I'm glad that subliminally we helped you guys have pizza tonight.
Exactly. All right, well, again, thank you so much. All right, moving on real quick so we can get on to the real cool stuff. So just upcoming meetups. Actually, I've got everything scheduled through February at this point. So next month, we'll have Phil Japiski coming to talk about ASP.NET 5. In December, we'll have Jeffrey Palmero talking about Blazor architecture patterns. January 21st, I'm drawing a blank of the person's name, but really interesting talk from the ball to C#, so kind of more of a back to basics talk. February is actually scheduled. I just don't have all the details yet, but I actually have a member of the Microsoft Identity team talking about identity for developers. So that should be a really good presentation. And then on ASP.NET, on the Louisville Azure group, our sister group, we only have October scheduled. I'm working on the others, but next week we'll have Corey Weathers, who will be doing building bots with Twilio, Autopilot, and Azure Functions. Sure enough, Corey is actually, he works with Twilio. Actually, I was watching him stream as he was prepping from this talk. It should actually be a really good talk. I like this demo that he's doing for it. So, all right, there are other groups. Louisville IT Happy Hour meets the second Tuesday of the month. And then my other two groups are on hiatus at the moment. Louisville Tech Leaders actually should be getting started hopefully in November. I'm actually going through some job changes, so I'm waiting for that to wrap up. But once I get that wrapped up, then I'm gonna get that group going again. And then the remote workers, the funny part is it actually doesn't work in the pandemic. The idea was to actually get remote workers out of the house, since we can't really do that right now. We can't go to a bar. That's on hiatus until we can do that again. All right, but and I've been saying the last couple months, I know we've got folks coming in, from .NET Virtual Group. There's a lot of user groups to check out, and that is one of the benefits of the pandemic, is that most of them have gone virtual. So there's all kinds of groups you can check out. This is just a random list of groups that I go to quite a bit. But there's meetings like every night, which is really nice. And sure enough, that does bring up, so Louisville.net is part of the .NET Foundation. And as part of that, our sessions are actually part of the .NET Foundation virtual group, user group. And that's actually picked up a lot of steam. They pretty much have something, almost every night that you can see stuff. All right, so .NET 5 is actually launching in a couple of weeks, and part of that is .NET Conf, which is Microsoft's virtual conference. They've actually been doing this virtual conference for 10 years. So it's not virtual because of the pandemic. It's the way how they've been doing this for a while. So definitely check that out, .NETConf.net. And I'm gonna probably do something on Twitch, kind of like watching it and commentating over it type thing, maybe. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. But that's November 10th through 12th. And again, that's a completely free event. And then sure enough, I was talking about, what shameless plug. I do stream Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 p.m. or thereabouts Eastern time at TaleLearCode. And sure enough, Sam is on Code It Live quite a bit. Code It Live is actually Progress Software's channel. I know Sam's on there at least 2 or 3 days a week. Ed Charbonneau, who actually helps me run this group, he's on there once or twice a week. So they have a lot of good content there. And then I don't actually see Code with Sean on tonight. He might be on Twitch, but he's also my moderator. But he also streams at Code with Sean, and he does a lot of infrastructure as code type presentations on his channel. All right, so with that, we normally would be going to BJ's, which is, for those who are not in the Louisville area, BJ's is right next door, essentially, to where we meet. We can't do that, but after the stream, after the presentation and questions, we will actually disconnect from Twitch, and we open it up for people to just hang out and pretty much just socialize. All right, and I will keep that going as long as people stay on. Right, and we have actually had it until 1 o'clock. And actually, that one time I went to 1 o'clock, I was like, all right, I'll let someone else stay on the host. I'm going to bed. But I will stick it around pretty much as long as people will. All right, with that, actually, it's funny. I was struggling to get a topic this month. And 2 weeks ago, there was TDevConf, which I was speaking at, and Sam was actually speaking at, and this was the presentation he gave. This is actually exactly the topic I've been looking for. So at the MVP Summit, so the MVP, so both Sam and I were MVPs with Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. Basically a distinction for giving back to the community. And one of the benefits is annually there's the MVP Summit where you get to gather and learn from the product groups. And the funny part was, so those who know me know I do back-end development. I don't like the front end. It's just not really my thing. But a thing I got the most excited from with Scott Hunter's presentation at the summit was when he talked about Maui. Because just listening to what they're trying to accomplish with this, I really got excited. Even though I'm not going to do any of it, right? Because I'm gonna have people like Sam build me my front ends, right? And the fact, and Sam has been doing Xamarin for I don't know how long as I can remember. So it's really cool to see. He's going to talk about, kind of how this is going to transition into Maui. After that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Sam.
All right, thank you for the intro, sir. All right, I switched to a single monitor because my fans were going crazy. So let me share the one that I'm on. It should be fine. Hopefully you can see it. not that. From the very beginning. There you go. Okay, and Chad, you don't see this little Zoom window that's floating around on your screens, do you?
No, no.
Yeah, I think Zoom is just smart enough to hide it.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And let me just dock that here. Okay, and let me go full screen on this. There you go. All right, so yeah, thank you, Chad, for having me here. I wish I could be there in person with you all. I've been to Louisville many times. I've been speaking and participating at Codepalooza for a decade now. So thank you, Chad, and the whole community, all of you, for doing what you do. But at least we get to hang out together and just casually have conversations about where things are going in tech. So yeah, let's do that. And I'm a talker, as Chad notes, so I can keep this as short as or as long as you want until Chad kicks me out and we can call it a day. All right, so my name is Sam Basu. I am a developer advocate for Progress Software. Many of you may know us for the things we make. That's all the TaleLearCode tooling for .NET devs. We do Kenda UI, we do Fiddler, we do a lot of different things to make developers more successful. I mostly focus on the .NET side of the thing, of the family, and I do just enough JavaScript to be dangerous. But that right there is my social handle. So if you need to get hold of me, Twitter, Skype, GitHub, that's me everywhere. So yeah, please reach out and let's have more conversations. Now, since, again, we are all living through a particularly challenging year for many, I do want to stress that we all need to take care of our families and ourselves in a way. So hopefully everyone's trying to be as happy and productive as we can and doing the right things in these trying times. And I'd like to say, like, this too shall pass. All right, so again, since we are all remote, I always like putting up a map. So we all live on a giant island between two huge oceans. I am right up by one of the Great Lakes, Erie. There's actually a town called Erie, Pennsylvania. We call it a little bit of a chimney. So there's a part of Pennsylvania that just kind of sticks out between Ohio and New York. You could, if you're going like east to west, like if you've ever gone to like Niagara, it's right. We are right in between like Cleveland and Buffalo. And you stop here for gas because there's no other reason for you to maybe stop. But that's where I'm at for the last like 7-8 years. And I work from home. The wife's a college professor. I travel a lot, but not this year. So this is at least great that we have the tech to be able to hang out together. So I'm guessing most of you are in Louisville. So hello to all of you. Someday I will come on down and we can hang out in person. So let's start talking about mobile. Let me see if I can make this a little smaller. Yeah, there we go. All right. Also, Zoom gives me a nice little option of like how many people I want to see, and then I can scroll through the rest. Yeah, nice. All right. So this is my kind of 1-minute spiel on all the different ways in which we can build for mobile form factors today. We are going to talk about the cross-compile, the Xamarin option, but it's good to keep in mind that like if you're a developer in any stack, like hopefully mobile strategies is not like an afterthought. It's 2020. If you don't target mobile devices, you miss out on a big chunk of your audience. So you have to think about mobile. Now, how you go about it is really up to you and up to your team and the expertise that you have and how you want to maintain your code base, a lot of different factors. So there's no right or wrong. I'm sure there are a few other like edge cases, but these are some of the broad ways in which I think we can build for mobile today. So first thing is native. We are talking about iOS, Android, and Windows. And by Windows, I do not mean Windows Phone. I spent like 2 to 3 years of my life on Windows Phone. It was great, but just didn't go anywhere. But all of the other Windows devices. So you can write native apps, and if you're doing especially things like games, or if you want to be really close to the metal, it makes a lot of sense, but it's expensive. For a single developer to know all three, it's hard. It's harder for enterprises to maintain like 3 different code bases towards a single app. So ideally, we would like a cross-platform story. So for cross-platform, you have a bunch of options. First thing is, if you are like, the lowest hanging fruit often is mobile web, which means essentially if you have a website today, there is no reason why it cannot work nicely on a mobile form factor. You have a lot of like open source frameworks that help you out. There is all the SPA frameworks like Angular, Bootstrap, VMake, Kenda UI. Everything helps you out to make things touch friendly, mobile friendly, and you can kind of take this mobile web concept to an extreme of what's called a progressive web app, PWA. Oh, and by the way, since we are on Zoom, like feel free to just turn on your cameras or microphones and just ask away questions. This is more of a conversation. So you can absolutely build PWAs with mobile websites, and this is where your mobile website starts being a very good citizen on mobile form factors. You get to have the user maybe pin your app, which is a website, to the home screen, and then you get to send them push notifications. You can have service workers running in the background, so it can actually be a really good experience. But that's all the web. Then if you want to go to the store, though, if you don't want to use the web as a distribution medium, then you can go to the stores. We have all heard maybe the PhoneGap, the Cordova story for the last 7-8 years. This is where it used to be called like hybrid apps. And essentially you're using web stuff like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you're packaging up an app using web technologies, but you put it in the store. And it works. So that's great. And you had access to all of the device APIs. So that was nice. But then when you talk about performance, it's not the best because it's running inside of like a big like web shell. So if you're using web stuff, why not actually build native apps with it? Because if you look down in your phones and look at how many apps are native, I can guarantee majority of them are actually native apps. And there are some cross-platform apps that do very well, but it takes a little bit of effort. And by native, I don't mean like native as written in iOS or Android. These are cross-platform solutions that render and work as native apps. So that's a good story. So in the last few years, the whole JavaScript native story has become really popular. We make an open source framework called NativeScript, works with Angular, works with Vue. If you're doing React for your web applications, you can do React Native. So a lot of it comes down to like, what else are you doing? So you can code share. You can start doing some mix and match between your mobile sites and your mobile apps and your websites and your desktop applications. And then we have the cross-compile story, which is where Xamarin has been the prominent player in the last few years. Makes it drop dead easy for .NET devs to build cross-platform mobile apps. You also have things like Uno platform, which we'll mention. There is Flutter, which is Dart, and it's still using some sort of a cross-compile thing to go to iOS or Android. So what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of options, right? If you want to stick to the web stuff, if you want to do JavaScript, go do that. You don't need to do Xamarin, you don't need to do .NET, but if .NET is what you want to do, then there are several options. We will talk more about the Xamarin land today, or the Microsoft story, but I mean, just know that there are a few other options as well. So all in all, I think it's just like we developers like to have a lot of choice until like we have too much choice, and then we are a little crippled as to how we decide and are we doing the right thing. So with that, let's move on. Let's talk about .NET. This is where I live and breathe, so I have thoughts and I have opinions about the ecosystem. It's been a good story so far, because if you look at where we stand today, we used to be all in this purple, which is the .NET framework as we know for the last like 17 years. And it's a big monolithic thing on which everything runs. And that's not going away. Maybe it's in a bit of a maintenance mode, but it'll run your apps fine for the next 10 years to come. At the least. And then we have .NET Core, which is about 5 years old now. It's lean, it's cross-platform, it's modular, runs everywhere. And then we have a port of .NET called Mono, which is what we'll look at today. That's kind of taking .NET for the first time outside of Windows to Linux, to Mac and other things. And Xamarin actually was an acquisition back in 2016, and Xamarin runs on Mono. And to this day, that's what it does. Eventually, you will see like a unification story. And the tools of our trade I mean, they have also come a long way. It's not just Visual Studio on Windows. You can do, I'm on a Mac today. I do use Windows and Mac interchangeably, but the good news is it doesn't matter anymore. You got Visual Studio Code that also is lightweight, runs everywhere. So this is what Chad was referring to with .NET Conf coming up this year. This is a big deal because it's the launch of .NET 5 officially. You can actually get to a release candidate and RC preview bits right now. But this thing is coming up in November 10th or 12th. They're going to formally announce it. So what this does is actually kind of unifies the parts of .NET. So it's taking the best of .NET Core and the best of Mono, putting it all together. So as developers, you don't have to choose which framework or which runtime you have to target. It kind of picks the right thing based on what you're doing, and the tools of our trade get better. So nothing not to like, anything in that story. Now let's jump into Xamarin. And again, like I said, if you have questions, concerns, please feel free to speak up. I have known folks on either side of this story. There are folks who absolutely love the Xamarin stack, and there are folks who are very concerned at this point as to what's happening. So again, the reality is probably somewhere in the middle, and it's all good. So let's talk about Xamarin. So Xamarin has been around for the last 7-8 years now in different forms. They started out as a bigger company, then they got sold off, then they became a smaller company, and then Microsoft acquired them, and then they became big again. But they haven't changed fundamentally what they do, and that's bringing .NET outside of Windows to iOS to Android and making truly native, truly cross-platform apps. And this is a good story to make .NET devs more productive and taking us places. So if you do Xamarin, if you start out Xamarin, you may hear a few different terms as to what this means, because it means a few different things. So this is kind of where they started. This is what's called traditional or Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android. So first thing we learned is to write some shared C# logic, because the business logic of your app that can actually be shared between different platforms, that's written in C#, so that's great. But we are still writing these heads separately, right? And you have to know iOS and Android and Windows UI to do that. So this was a good step in the right direction. But then this came along, and I'm a bigger fan of this. This is Xamarin.Forms. Started out as just a prototyping tool, but then it evolved very, very quickly once we figured out how to do the UI stack better. So this one has the same idea, but now instead of just business logic, we also have a UI layer, which is an abstraction. So now we are sitting on top of iOS or Android or Windows and trying to write code that is not specific to any platform. And we expect that at runtime, it will go ahead and render native UI for each platform that we're running on. So this is good because as a .NET dev, I don't want to learn a lot about iOS or Android. This gets me most of the way out there. But you'll notice like there's still a little bit of like that purple and the green and the blue. The reality is like you can't always just get away from it. And you don't probably want to, because there might be things like that are iOS specific that you want to do. So you do have the option of getting down into native land at any point and doing this. So a couple of slides that we won't spend too much time, because I don't think it matters anymore. Like we used to get this question, like which one should I do? Because I see different types of Xamarin. So Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android, yeah, still very much a good solution for line of business apps. If you want that native customization on each platform, and if you're doing games, yeah, you can do that. You can actually embed Xamarin.Forms inside of these things. Or if you ask me now, I would say start with Xamarin.Forms almost always, because it's the easiest thing to do. You don't have to learn a whole lot. If you have done any C#, if you have done any XAML for other platforms like WPF, like Silverlight, like UWP, it will feel very natural. This is what .NET devs know. So this is the easier thing to start. And again, like I said, you can do native stuff anywhere you want. The piece of code that renders the native UI for iOS or Android behind you writing the XAML visual tree is called a renderer, and you can customize that renderer, and you can always render native controls. So like, why not? Why would you not start here? So my 2 cents, this is the easier thing to do, and I'm a fond of easy things, as you can tell. Well, I guess you cannot tell, but I'm old. I'm old. I've been doing this, and I like to keep things simple if we can. Now, our phones are loaded with sensors, and we want to get access to those things, right? When you're building a mobile app, you want the camera, you want the geolocation, you want all of these sensors. And earlier, you used to have to write Java or Objective-C code, which you don't want to write. There was a time when we had like an open source community-driven approach to this, where you had different packages for doing different things. And then this is my good friend, like James Montemagno, who's the PM on the Xamarin.Forms team, or on Xamarin team, essentially. And this is his baby. And this is just taking everything together and putting it out as one NuGet package from Microsoft, so you can trust this. And they're careful about this. They do some tree shaking. So if you use this, and if you're only using just the camera in your app, they don't give you all of the other APIs to kind of load up your app package. You only get what you need. So this is easy. This is all in C#. So why not? Now, no matter what you do, though, with Xamarin, you are writing purely native apps, which is a good thing. For Android, I don't think this is accurate anymore. Like you can pre-compile. You don't have to do JIT anymore. So no matter where you're running pure native. Now, as developers, we can always shoot ourselves in the foot, but the framework doesn't really get in the way of performance. So, and I have always enjoyed like how the Xamarin team kind of defines what is a native app, right? We keep talking about this, but what makes a native app? What do you call native and what do you call hybrid or like a mixed bag? So it's three things. One is, does the app have native UI that's native to iOS or Android, wherever you're running it? Does the app have native API access, so you can access all of the device sensors? And does it have native performance? And if you check all the boxes, then it's a native app. And maybe some things matter a little bit more, like Flutter, for example. Like everyone's kind of very excited about Flutter these days. It's great, and the dev story is great, the performance is great, but it's not really native, right? It's we are painting pixels with Flutter, but maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's fine. So again, it comes down to what your priorities are. Now, one of the kind of downsides of Xamarin was it was expensive to get into. It was $1,000 per developer per platform. And Microsoft came in and said, no, let's share the love. It's all open source. I actually do look at nightly builds for Xamarin.Forms once in a while. It's a big project, but it's not terrible. And so there's no barrier to entry. You're coming into a big open source rich ecosystem with lots of contributions from the community and continuous efforts to improve the tooling for developers. So yeah, everything is open source. There are a couple of aspects that we can talk about that are not completely free, but then those are things that's a good problem to have. Like as an enterprise, like some of the testing solutions are not completely free, but again, that means your app has made it. So it's a good problem to have. But otherwise, like Visual Studio Community onwards, everything is free. So let's talk about Xamarin. And before we, I know that the title is like, we're talking about MAUI, but where is the MAUI part of it? So this is me spending like the first half of it just setting the stage, because we can't talk about the future before we understand what the present holds and like what are some of the promises and what are some of the challenges. And then we can talk about how this is evolving. So with Xamarin, a lot of love has been poured in the last like 5 years or so. With Xamarin, you get about 3 major releases a year, and then you get like service packs in between. I'm looking at like the last like 2 to 3 releases that we have had, and a lot of it goes towards making sure the developers have all of the UI that we need. We have a concept of a shell, which in a native app, like you have a collection of pages and you're navigating between pages. The shell makes it a little easier for developers. A bunch of new UI controls out of the box. The hot reload and restart thing, this has kind of been a hot topic per se, because if you're doing the web stuff, then you are used to a lot of speed, and the dev cycle, as we say, like when a developer writes a little bit of code and we want to see that stuff working and running, that takes a bit of time in Xamarin land, because there is some drama. There's some bits moving around to do the build and push it out. The web side of the things has it a little easier because they are used to the concept of like components, and then they use Webpack, and you can realize which component you're touching and you only push out that update. With Xamarin, it's always been like one big thing. So they are trying to rework this. Hot reload is here. Essentially, that lets you change anything in your XAML, which is your visual tree, and then it shows up right away. And then hot restart is if you're running the app in the device, it can still realize that you do not need a full app build, and do like an incremental thing and push it out. So again, a lot of love has been poured into making that developer cycle a little tighter. Drag and drop controls, gradients, brushes, flyouts. Yeah, these are what came out, the big releases in the last 2 or 3 ones, if we look back. Now, this is an example of what I was talking about in the hot reload. This is actually one of our sample apps, which I can show you if you have time. So this is actually out in the stores, so you can do a search on TaleLearCode. It's a full-featured app. You don't have to use any of our UI. It's just to kind of see how an app works, and it's all following a certain design pattern, and you can play around with the UI. So this is us just changing the XAML, and you can see the UI update itself. And this works for every app. So this is a great story because it makes us productive, and we don't have to kind of reload the app all over again. Now, when it comes to any questions, I'm not watching chat here, by the way, folks. So please just turn on your camera, speak up if you have any questions, and I think Chad can relay any Twitch things that come up. So when it comes to mobile, there are just things you have to do. It's not easy. Mobile is just not easy, despite anybody who says it's exciting. Yeah, it's exciting, but it's very challenging because it's not fire and forget. It's a lot of maintenance, and it's a lot of upfront and continual costs that you have to pay. So do you want to go to the app stores, or do you want to just have an enterprise-wide distribution? Do you want to have a CI/CD pipeline for your teams? So for all of this, like, there are several tools. My preferred solution, and I use this personally, it's Visual Studio App Center. I obviously don't work for Microsoft. I don't get paid to say this, but I mean, this is a really nice offering that brings in all of the things like testing your app and keeping a tab on how things are performing while you are out in the store, and capturing like crash reports. So for all of this, this is great. And it works just not for Xamarin, but for other types of apps as well. So this is a really good solution. All right, so now we are, let me see, 7:30 my time. I'm in Eastern. Is Louisville in Eastern? I forget. No, you're Central, right?
Oh, we're Eastern.
Oh, you're Eastern. Okay, good. All right, so yeah, let me spend a little bit more time, and then I'll like to show you some demos of some of the things that are changing. So let's talk about, so this is the Xamarin. This is the core of what Xamarin has been up to, and you can see that there are continuous efforts to make things better. Let's talk about some of the edge cases. Now, Xamarin.Forms was great, but then it became open source, and we could all see. So this is the layer that does most of the magic, where you write some code that's in XAML, or it could be in pure C#, and then you have renderers that render native UI. So the community stepped up, and some very smart folks said, we can write our own renderers. So now we have renderers for a lot of different things. We run on Mac, we run on GTK Linux. I don't know if you have heard of this thing called Tizen. If you use a Samsung device that is not running Android, so the Gear watches run, no, I think actually they run Tizen as well, but Samsung makes like TVs and refrigerators, and they're all running Tizen, and Xamarin runs on it beautifully. And we are getting back to WPF. We are getting back to the web in some ways, which we'll talk about. So lots of exciting things. Your code just goes to places. Now, this is the other side of the story, because when Xamarin first came out, they started promoting a flavor of XAML. So XAML stands for Extensible Application Markup Language. It's simple, like it's an XML-like language. It's not quite XML, but it has like specific tags that the platforms understand. So this all started with WPF, right? That was the first one that came up with it. And then there was UWP, there was Silverlight, and each team at Microsoft kind of took XAML and did their own thing. So which means there is some fragmentation. So Xamarin.Forms XAML is actually quite a bit different from UWP XAML, or Windows XAML as they call it. And it's annoying for a lot of folks. It's not for me, because it's just like annoying differences. But once you get used to it, once you know what is what, you kind of move forward. But if you wanted to do like Windows XAML, which is UWP XAML, then you have Universal Windows Platform from Microsoft. This lets you run your app everywhere, which is a good story. PC, Xboxes, HoloLens, Surface Hubs, why not, IoT. And actually, Xamarin.Forms will also target UWP, but that support is it's eroding a little bit right now, and that's what is being reworked. So one of the things that they have realized is you cannot tie UWP too closely to Windows 10, because Windows 10 has like the major updates, and you're waiting on a Windows update to sell out or to push out your UI stack, right? So that's not good enough. So they're trying to separate the Windows UI from the Windows OS per se. So it's end-to-end UI done in XAML. So that's the Win UI story. And you might hear more about it at .NET Conf, and also evolving into next year. The idea is to have a Windows stack, which will be for both Win32 applications running like WPF or WinForms, as well as for the newer stuff like UWP. And the idea is like when .NET MAUI comes along, which we'll talk about, it will actually use WinUI. So your code just naturally runs on the latest and greatest on Windows. But again, this means it runs everywhere on HoloLens and Surface Hub, which is great. We are also starting to see dual screen devices, right? So there was the Surface, I think it was called the Duo that came out. That's Android, expensive, like $1,300 for a device, but it's great because it introduces a whole new like UI and UX paradigms, right? Like you have all of a sudden you have like double the real estate. What do you do with it? Do you flow? Do you have a master detail page? Do you have a dual view, complementing views? There's a lot of things you can do, and Xamarin supports this very much, and that's a good story, and it'll continue in MAUI when we get to it. Now, a few other things that are on the edges. This is actually on the Mac side of things. Apple has had the same problem with app stores. Everybody wants to build for iOS App Store. Almost nobody wants to build for the Mac desktop app store. And they're trying to fix this. So this has been an ongoing effort. You actually see some of it in the latest Mac updates, and you'll see more of it next year. So the point is to make iOS apps run on Mac desktop. So essentially, they got like a dozen or so apps already running, like your news and your stocks. Those apps run just fine. So you essentially have more real estate. Maybe you have hamburger icons or menu icons, and you just change the flow and the layout of your app, and it starts working on desktop. And all of these iOS apps can be written in Xamarin.Forms, right? So it gives you like a big market, big new market to target, and that's good. Now, this is something new, which we talked about. This is not Xamarin.Forms, right? But you can see how closely everything is tied together. This is kind of across the pond from me, like not the Atlantic pond, but Lake Erie. If you cross it over into Canada, I can actually get to Canada in like 30 minutes. If I get on a boat and if I go straight north, I'm in Canadian waters pretty quick. And so this is a bunch of very smart guys out of Montreal. I think they have offices in Toronto as well. So this is Uno platform. So they started out as a company, and then they have this internal framework on how they did things, and then they made that open source. So the company is now separate from the open source framework. And Uno platform essentially takes your Windows XAML, which is the UWP XAML that we talked about, and it takes it to iOS or Android, because without that, UWP essentially is universal within the Windows stack, which is not caring for the other things. This will take you to all other places. And we'll talk about WebAssembly. I think WebAssembly, Uno platform actually has the best WebAssembly support at this point. But you see like the story down here, like Uno is actually using Mono and Xamarin under the covers. So it's all tied together. It's just the UI shim that's different. All right, now, let's talk about Blazor, and I have the unfortunate honor of working with somebody daily that you may know, Ed Sherman, who helps you run this group and is good friends with me and Chad. He's a great guy, but he's devoted his life to Blazor, and it's great. It's for good reason. A lot of folks are excited. If you're in the ASP.NET world, if you're a web developer, and if you do .NET, like you should be all in on this because it is very exciting. So a lot of .NET shops have moved into writing SPA applications with JavaScript, like Angular and React and Vue, and that's all great. But that makes Microsoft a little nervous because now you're moving into JavaScript, and maybe a lot of your devs don't want to do that. So Blazor is kind of leveling that playing field. It is not here to kill JavaScript. Don't let people tell you that. It is here to give you an option. If you did not want to do JavaScript, if you wanted to write C# front and back, then this is your thing. And Blazor started out doing much of this, which was a server-side Blazor story. you essentially had a server-side model. The component model is kind of similar to Razor, and it's actually similar to React as well in a lot of ways. And we had the client-side DOM being manipulated and maintained over a signal-hour bridge, which is real-time. And then this May, with Build, they actually announced WebAssembly support, which was fully client-side. So that makes Blazor like a full-on citizen in the web world. So your C# code is actually running in the browser natively, just like JavaScript code, which is run by the JavaScript engines. This is just getting compiled down again through Mono into low-level, almost assembly-like code that your browser can execute. Now, Blazor is, again, for web stuff, right? So why are we even talking about it? Because Blazor has implications for some of the things that we do. It has implications for desktop, because you can wrap it up in an Electron shell, which you should not do because it's very heavy-handed. They're actually playing around with some lighter web views. So your things like your Teams or your Visual Studio Code or Slack, those are all web apps that run fine on desktop, right? So that's what Blazor can do. And then it also has implications for PWAs, because you can absolutely write very nice PWAs with Blazor. And then you can also write native mobile apps with Xamarin just over, or with Blazor just like sitting on top of Xamarin. So this is kind of everywhere. And that's exciting. All right, so I'm like 40 minutes out and folks are like, where is Maui? So let's talk about Maui. So this is the lay of the land. This is where we stand today. And you can see like there are pain points. It's a great story that we can take .NET. Let me turn my fan on real quick. So it's a great story that we can take .NET everywhere, but the tooling could improve. And we don't realize this, but once we are in the C# XAML mode, we kind of are in a little walled garden. Over the years, we have set up this walled garden, so we have nice tools, but it's you pay a little bit of a cost to get in. And why should there be a cost? Why should not this be more accessible to anybody? Because the power of Xamarin and what they have done over the last few years is in those renderers, that they can render native UI so effortlessly. So now we are trying to open it up to other things and other platforms being able to come on. So let's talk about .NET MAUI. So this was something we heard earlier in the year and then came out at the Build. And this is going to be an interesting thing to mention in terms of timelines. So we have a long, long runway to go, right? It was initially slated for end of this year, right about this time, but with the pandemic and everything going on, and they realized Microsoft like how much they were having to chew off. So they pushed it back to do things right. So you're going to get .NET 5 this year in November. But this is officially going to come out production ready in 2021 November. So more than a year, almost a year and a half away now. And that's targeting .NET 6. But that doesn't mean that everything has to be waiting until November of next year. Because we're going to start seeing previews show up by the end of this year, and you're going to see a lot of effort with the community to make sure we are doing things right. So this is kind of the evolution of Xamarin.Forms. A lot of folks have not had a lot of confidence in Xamarin because they have always felt, oh, .NET and Microsoft is one thing, and then Xamarin is kind of off on its own. So they want to bring it all together so you have confidence in going in with Xamarin. So what you know as Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android will essentially just be .NET iOS and .NET for Android, right? Simple. And then Xamarin.Forms evolves into what's called MAUI, which is a funny acronym they came up with, and it kind of sticks. And I think they've gotten some URLs in place. It's multi-platform app UI. So it is the same story as Xamarin.Forms with a few more options. And they're improving the things that are painful. That is a lot of different projects that we have to maintain, deploying to multiple devices, multiple simulators all at once, supporting mobile, supporting desktop. So all of that is in place. And yeah, it's all open source, so we can see what's cooking. So in terms of just the overall reach, not a whole lot is changing, but again, that's for the good, because we are going to support iOS and Android, obviously, and we are going to support macOS, which we do kind of with Xamarin.Forms, so it's just going to get better. And we're going to support Windows like really well done, because the UWP story did not scale well. We are talking about doing things with WinUI, so it is the latest and greatest. Now, in terms of Xamarin projects, I'll show you some of this. We used to have, or we still do, we maintain a lot of different projects for each platform. That's all getting unified. So your fonts, your images, anything that you want to kind of serve up on a per platform basis, they can all kind of live together, and they are smart in how they do their builds. And the other things that Xamarin.Forms support, like watchOS or tvOS or Android Gear, nothing is going away. So this will all be fine. And a lot of folks are right now asking, like, should I, like, if I'm new to Xamarin, is this the right for me? Yes, and if you're already maintaining Xamarin apps, yeah, it's fine. It's going to be fine because you'll have an easy migration. In fact, they proposed a few namespace changes and people pushed back big time on it. So you're going to be fine. What you're doing, it's going to be just an evolution of Xamarin.Forms. So like I said, when it comes to the XAML ecosystem, the C# thing, we can do WPF and we can do Universal Windows Platform and we can do Xamarin.Forms. So it's a good place to be. Lots of love, lots of rich tooling. I don't know if I have said this enough. I'm old, so I've used a lot of like Blend back in my days. That was a great tool. That's still actually there in Visual Studio. Just the ecosystem that makes a platform or a framework successful. It's all there for your Xamarin and XAML ecosystem. But this doesn't need to be the only thing. So one of the things that we have learned doing really well with XAML and C# or F# type code bases is a design pattern called MVVM, which is model, view, view model. So you understand, like, just from the terminology, this is a design pattern. You don't have to use it. Some of it is actually baked into Xamarin.Forms, but if you are on a bigger team, you can get a framework that helps you out. That's MVVM Lite, MVVM Cross, and Prism. So the idea is the model is essentially the thing that handles your data. It's your data objects, and you talk to a database or your services. The view is as lightweight as possible. That's just as dumb and thin as possible. And the view model is the orchestrator that takes data from the model, hands it out to the view, and does the updates, and vice versa, right? So this is there, and that's been a pattern that we have used a lot. Then this is something actually Microsoft is spending a lot of time. I'm friends with most of the Xamarin guys. David Ortno, who's the PM for Xamarin.Forms, he is just kind of double stressing to say MVVM and XAML is not going away. It's going to be just fine going into .NET MAUI. But kind of trying to open up the funnel and invite more folks into this. Why should it be just C# and XAML devs who enjoy Xamarin? Why not some other folks as well? So if you are doing Flutter, if you are doing even like Blazor for that matter, a lot of web devs are actually very used to this pattern, which is MVU. It's a simpler pattern, and it's the same idea, like just the way the update happens, but it's a different terminology and how we call things. So the model is not just for your data. The model essentially becomes the state of your application, like how it's running, what is it that's in memory, what's next, and what is it that you're trying to remember. And that model kind of drives what the UI is that you're seeing, be it on a web app or be it on a mobile app. And then you have messaging that are being dispatched back and forth, and you have an update loop. So if anything changes in the UI stack, the model needs to be updated, and as a result, the model is going to drive the UI to be updated as well. So this is a model view update pattern, and this is coming in .NET MAUI. It's like one more thing that you can do. That actually icon is something called Comet, which I can show you. It's a experimental thing right now, but it kind of gives you an idea of how things will evolve with Xamarin.Forms and kind of supporting a new design pattern in .NET MAUI. So this is exciting. All right, so I've been talking quite a bit and quite fast, so please let me know if you have questions. Quick little pitch. If you are in the Xamarin space and if you're trying to ship apps for enterprises, or if you're an indie dev like me and you're shipping apps on nights and weekends, don't reinvent the wheel, please. There's a lot of help. We are Progress. We make TaleLearCode, obviously, for all of your .NET tools across web, desktop, and mobile. Any app, any platform. And this is something I spend quite a bit of time on. This is our UI suite for Xamarin. And you realize that you get about 30 or so abstracted UI controls from Microsoft, and it's not enough because you need the grids, you need the charts, you need like a side drawer, like a data grid, busy indicators, calendars, all of that stuff which you actually need. It's not out of the box, so that's when you need to pick up. And again, I'm biased, so please look around. There are others who make similar tooling, and that's what keeps the ecosystem going. Competition is good for all of us. And the point is, look around and find the best UI suite for what you are trying to do. And don't spend the time building this all by hand. It's just a lot of effort, a lot of engineering that needs to go in to make these app UIs native and working as performantly as you would like. So there's a lot of help on the UI front with Xamarin. All right, Chad, care for some code? Let's do it. Please let me know if you have any questions. All right, let's start with Visual Studio. And like I said, I'm on my Mac today, but it's the same experience. Like Xamarin, there's really no difference. So I should probably start here. So if I go do a search on Xamarin, this is where you will land, right? Start here. If you have not ever done Xamarin, start here, get started. And then based on whether you're using Mac or Windows, get the right Visual Studio. And then Visual Studio is just a gigantic beast at times, right? So they have broken it up into what's called, I think it's called workspaces or workflows. So like, do you want to do mobile apps, or do you want to do web apps? Do you want to do Azure and so on? So get the mobile slice, and that's going to get you Xamarin. It's still not like cheap, because you are getting iOS and Android bits to actually run your app. A question that we get a lot is like, do I need an Apple device to target iOS? And the answer is yes and no, because it is a native app, and it is an Apple restriction that the app that you are making needs to be built in Xcode that is licensed to the same developer who has the App Store account, and no one can get you around that. So you do need a Mac, but it doesn't need to be a physical Mac. Like I'm on a Mac, and that helps. You can throw a Mac anywhere on a network, and it'll do the build. There are a lot of like cloud-based help as well. Like Visual Studio App Center will do cloud builds. There are a few other services. Like there's macinthecloud.com, where you're actually paying for the Mac to run it as an OS, and you're just doing the build and coming back. So get the Xamarin bits. It's pretty easy to get started once you have the bits. All right, so let's start with this one. Hopefully I won't keep you for too long. I know you all have things to do. So probably another 20 minutes or so, I should be able to wrap up. But again, like I said, I can keep talking forever if you'd let me. All right, so this is a quick app where you kind of see the classic way in which we define Xamarin.Forms projects. If you do file new project, you see all the Xamarin.Forms options. Like these are templates that will be installed once you have the Xamarin bits. And this is kind of the classic structure. You have what's called a standard or a shared project. This is actually a .NET standard library, so you can actually take this into WPF or any other .NET app that you're building, and that's shared across all platforms. It'll give you an Android project, which I have deleted that. I don't always like working with Android simulators because they can be a little painful. So I like my iOS. And then for each platform that you support, you end up adding new platform-specific things to it. Because like when you have like splash screens or images or fonts, those need to be embedded into those platform-specific projects. But once you have that structure, your goal is to kind of stay here and do everything here in the common shared project and not touch the platform-specific things as much as you can, right? Okay, so with that, let me show you what this app does really quick, and then we'll see how this works. So I'm going to fire this up while we chat, and you'll notice that it's doing an iOS build. That's my startup project, and it's doing it on an iPhone Pro Max 14. The iPhone 12 just came out, so new hardware, always exciting. Okay, so this is kind of like a hello world thing, right? When it comes to like mobile apps, most apps end up being a list of things. And what I'm doing is just going to a random site on the internets and pulling back some data that I can show in my mobile app, right? So this one is actually pulling back stuff in Latin. And it's just a long list of things. And there's like a little search thing I can filter on. So just kind of hello world, can I get some data down from a cloud service into a mobile app? And the answer is yes. So let's take a quick look as to what this entails. And let me make the fonts a little bigger. So let me know if you can read it. I can change things. I am unpopular opinion, especially if you are a streamer. I like my light light fonts and light interfaces. I'm not a fan of dark mode, but again, if this is too bright for anybody's eyes, I'm happy to switch. All right, so what I have here is everything is in the common .NET Standard library. I have a simple RESTful endpoint, which I can actually show you what it does. So when I go to this URL, it's just a great place to kind of test your APIs if you need to. And you get like, for a blog or something, you get posts and comments and albums. So this is what we are making a call on, like posts, and you get like each of these like units of JSON back, and they have like user ID, title, and so on. And it's all in Latin, which makes it fun. So that's what we are after. So in our code, back in here, that's my RESTful service pointing to posts. Then this is kind of where most Xamarin.Forms apps start out. You have an app startup model, and you have on start, on sleep, and on resume. Start is obviously when your app starts up. Sleep is when your app goes in the background, the user does something else. Resume is when the app comes back. And then if the user is running, somebody like me who's running like hundreds, and all of you probably, like hundreds of apps, eventually your OS is going to be like, yeah, you're just sitting there taking memory and just chewing through it. The user is not using it. So eventually the OS might kill your app, right? So you do not get notified if your app is killed. So your sleep is your indicator to kind of save state as you need to. So here we're just saying that's my main page, which is essentially kind of the main.cs. That's where my thing starts. So I'm just pointing it to my first start page. This one doesn't have any navigation, but you can also start with the navigation stack. Then you can navigate back and forth. So in here, let me see, the Zoom pop-up thing is too curious to show me stuff. There you go. Okay, so first up, I have a simple POCO object, which is just a list of properties that I'm dealing with coming down from the cloud. So title, body, user object. Then I have a post manager, which essentially is using an HTTP client on iOS or Android. I don't care. It just works seamlessly with C#. And then I'm using async and await. And what I'm doing is using something called observable collection. I'm hoping most of you are developers. Tune me out if this is too technical. I'm just trying to show you some basics. So we are creating a collection of generics that we're going to hold. That's where we go off, use that RESTful endpoint, make a response, read string async, and then capture all of the JSON back, transform it into an object, and then we can bind to it. So this is my XAML. This is if you're looking at XAML for the first time, this is how it looks like. It's a little verbose. It is for older people like me, so that's all good. But it's fairly easy to follow. It gets a little verbose, especially if you're doing lots of custom behaviors, but the basics are not hard. So I have a list view here, which is a Xamarin list view, and then I have an item template which controls how each row looks like, and I'm just using a label to bind to the title of each post that comes back. And then this is my code behind, kind of like the same ASP.NET model. There's code and there's code behind. This one here is saying, go ahead and fetch the posts from that manager. And when it's ready to draw the UI, set the item source property, which is essentially a collection view, to that list that we're getting back from the store or from the service, and just that's it. Just render that UI. So that's how it works, and it's just kind of hello world. Now take a look at this. I am not going to change any line of code here in the .NET Standard library, and you already, by just the name of it, you realize where I'm going with this. So I'm going to change my startup project, and I'm going to hit run again. So now, hopefully, what you're going to see, this is a native Mac desktop application, right? I didn't change a line of code. This is all still Xamarin.Forms. And this is the beauty of it. It just runs in so many places. It runs on Tizen, runs on WPF, runs on desktop. So this is Mac. It's pulling back the same list of posts, and it has that search filtering thing. So the only thing that we did, excuse me, was in the Mac project, there's the app delegate file. And this is kind of how a Mac desktop application starts out, using a storyboard. Here we are saying, don't do the storyboard, please. Let's do Xamarin.Forms. So these two lines of code here, forms init and load application, this is kind of standard boilerplate Xamarin.Forms code. We are saying, here's a new window. That's the X and the Y and the width and the height of the window. And we're going to stick in Xamarin.Forms and let it drive the UI. So it just works on a Mac, right? So this is just a quick example. I can show you the same app if I have time working on WPF, which is nice. So lots of choices. Now let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about MAUI a little bit. Yeah, let's talk about Blazor, and then we'll talk about the other MVU thing with MAUI. So if you're doing Blazor, again, you understand that's for the web stuff, but it actually has implications for mobile because you can actually build native cross-platform apps using Xamarin, but Blazor and the Blazor syntax. So what you have here is an experimental thing here. So if I can find it, hang on. Yeah, there we go. So look this up if you're interested. It's called mobile Blazor bindings. So essentially what you're doing is exposing the parts of Xamarin UI that you need just through Blazor. It is purely a Xamarin app, Xamarin.Forms app actually, but just rendered through Blazor. And Microsoft has a few like example apps that you can run through. This one's just my example. So same idea as we did before. Here you will see that everything is Razor, everything is Blazor syntax, and everything has like an import statement. And the app.cs looks different because this is not using the Xamarin model. This is using its own component engine. And this kind of looks like ASP.NET, how you have like a ASP.NET middleware and how you hook up your pipeline. This is DI, right? So you can bring in your services and register them right here. This one's saying, hey, my main page is that page, and then I can add any number of components I want, and then I can navigate between the components. So that's me. That's my one Hello World component. Now, I also do have the same exact code. Like this one is the posts list of posts, and then I have a post manager, which does the exact same thing, fetches the posts from that service. But then I have this thing called post list. This one here is using syntax that kind of looks like Xamarin.Forms, but it's actually not Xamarin.Forms. It's trying to cater to the web audience as well and bringing them on for the ride. But this may be a little bit of a learning curve. Like this to me looks familiar because I do XAML. But if you're doing web, I mean, think of it as like almost like HTML type syntax. You just need to know what UI elements you're rendering. And this looks a little bit dirty because you are mixing UI closely with server-side code. And there's no server-side here. It's all running on the mobile device. But you don't have to do this, actually. This is all inclusive. There is the UI part, and then there's the code part. But you can actually split off this code part into a separate file, like into a .cs, a razor.cs file. Then it'll keep your code separate. And then here's my Hello World Razor. So before I do that, let's look at the code behind. So here I'm actually doing a code behind. You can see the syntax here. It's just by convention, Razor and then razor.cs. Here we are going off fetching the data, and then we are getting the posts, right? Once we have the posts, we switch to the Razor view, which says, let's do a for each loop. So we are going to render that post list for every post that we get back. And I get back about 100 or so. And we are going to set the parameter of that thing to the post that we're getting back. So we are literally looping through the post. And so it renders that post component essentially 100 times, right? So however you look at it, if you're doing a list view, the item template repeats as many times. And then here, just like React, the component repeats as many times as you need. So if I go ahead and run this now, you will see another app that looks very familiar and similar. Okay, but done completely differently with Blazor. So this is the exciting part. So you can actually do Blazor, and the performance is great because it is purely Xamarin.Forms. So if you're doing Blazor, consider this as your way to kind of step into mobile land and be able to share some code and yet be able to write mobile apps that are native and cross-platform. All right, so let's talk about one more thing. Let's talk about comment. So this was funny. I'll show you this. So if you do a search on .NET MAUI, you're likely going to end up with this post first, which is Scott Hunter, who's the principal manager for all of your .NET tooling. He's a good man to know. So they wrote up what .NET MAUI is all about, the single project experience, and they talked about how they're opening it up to a few other design patterns like MVVM, which we do today. And then we're going to, excuse me, have MVU. And they pointed to this gentleman named Thomas Band and his post. So if you want to learn more about MVU, like this is a fantastic post. Like if you do a search on how does MVU work, you're going to likely end up on this page and just read through it. I read this like many times trying to understand what exactly does it do. And it's a very, very good post. So it talks about how there's like a main, there's a program, there's an entry point, there's an init, there's a message that takes the messaging back and forth. And then there's an update function, which does that whole loop so that the UI can update the model and vice versa. But it is still like, looks like one-way data binding, but it's actually working two ways. So Microsoft pointed to this, and then this gentleman wrote a post to say, yeah, what you're doing in MAUI is not really MVU, but it's okay. It's a design pattern, right? It's open to interpretation, and that's what we're doing. So what you're seeing actually in MAUI, the MVU part of what you're seeing is actually driven by, if I can pull up that GitHub repo. Yeah, I think I have it here. So look up this thing called Comet, right? This is by a couple of different folks, but this guy, James Clancy, I've had him on my stream a couple of times, very, very smart engineer. So he's been playing around with this quite a bit, and that's kind of what we are going off in terms of how the whole MVU pattern is going to work in .NET MAUI. So you can see like what they're doing. It's just the model, the view, and the update. So you have the model that's driving the state of your application, and then the bindings come in. You have to have an update loop, and then you update the model, and then it re-renders the UI. So if that's what we're looking at, let's look at, oh, I already pulled this up. So this is Comet, right? And the best part is like the Comet tooling right now with .NET MAUI, you're going to get Xamarin.Forms support in Visual Studio Code, which is what you don't have right now because it's all MS build. So you're going to get the .NET Core type builds come .NET MAUI, but Comet already does kind of support it in Visual Studio Code if you want it to, and kind of the hot reload thing is built in. So here you'll notice that if I look into my references, dependencies, NuGet. So here you'll see that it has Xamarin Essentials, but it doesn't have Xamarin.Forms, because what it's using, it's essentially what's called the universal renderers. So they are taking the renders that we already had for Xamarin.Forms and just reusing it for Blazor, reusing it for MVU, and that's the power of it. So here you'll see that, excuse me, you get the same exact idea. You have a main page, but then you have a state. So this is kind of the model of your, like what's controlling the state of your application. This one's a simple counter of how many buttons you click. And then you have a body, which essentially VStack is a virtual or a vertical stack. You can have a horizontal stack. You can have a Z stack. And then you have UI elements that you render. So all of this is done in C#, which is, again, you're going to get great IntelliSense. It may be a little verbose, but they are going to try to fix it up. So as you can see here, you have a text box that's connected to the count property and its value. And then the button will come in and increment that by +1. And just by nature of that, you're updating the model. So this view gets updated, right? So if I go ahead and run this now and bring up the simulator, okay, so you see the Comet logo go by, and then you have a button. And as predicted, we can click on this and it increments, right? So nothing out of ordinary, but what's different is how we are rendering the UI and how we are using the renderers for Xamarin.Forms, right? So all of these things are great to play around with. I can keep showing you demos a lot more because this is what I do. But it's been over an hour, so let me start wrapping things up on the slides. I mean, WPF, I mean, you kind of get the idea. You can get another set of renderers for WPF, and then it works on WPF. You can get another set of renderers for Tizen, then it works on Tizen. So this is all Xamarin.Forms code that just runs everywhere. And actually, I might actually show you one more thing. So bear with me, right? And this is where I do the crazy thing of bringing up Windows. I don't know if anybody else runs Windows in a VM like I do. I do have actually a Windows box that's sitting under my desk, but this one's convenient because it's just on my machine. So I'm going to show you one quick thing, and we can stop unless like Windows decides to do an update. Okay, doesn't look like it. Okay, so really quick. Now we're going to do Visual Studio 2019 on Windows. And yeah, let's show you this one here. So this one is using, while it's loading up, is actually using Uno platform, right? So again, a different variation. This is not Xamarin.Forms per se, but it is XAML, and it is using Mono. It is using Xamarin under the covers. So just the UI part of it is using Windows UI, which is nice. So here, once this thing loads up, I promise this is the last thing I'm going to show you, and then tell me what questions you might have. All right, so let me get my little Zoom window off down here a little bit. You don't see that, which is good. So here you have several different projects, right? So when you do a file new project, you see iOS, you see Android, you see UWP, which is Universal Windows Platform, because obviously you want to run on Windows. And then you see WASM, which is WebAssembly, right? So this is a little bit of code that's actually main page XAML. This is the same UI that will power your Xamarin.Forms application, except now it's not labeled, it's text block, and it just says hello world, right? So let's go ahead and run this thing. So for those of you who are like me and you have seen technologies come and go and things die, I spent another few years on Silverlight, and that was a good time because the whole plugins model on the web does not scale, but the dev experience with Silverlight was actually really good. And we are bringing XAML back to the web in some way. It's just done better without using plugins. So you see the hello world. This is like really as simple as a demo as it can get. But what it shows you is that text and all of the UI. In fact, you can take any Xamarin.Forms UI and it'll work just like that on the web. So that's just XAML working on the web. So if I can, let me close this. Well, actually, hang on. Since we are here, might as well show you one more thing. And I'm going to show you something else, and then we're going to come back to this. This is the same solution that I had on the Mac. But take a look at this one here. Now the head is WPF, so you know where I'm going with this. So I can fire this up. And now you have the same list of like those Latin texts coming back from the web service. And now this is a pure WPF application, right? So I'm trying to show you the flexibility. I'm not saying go build your next WPF application in Xamarin.Forms. Please don't do that. It's not mature enough yet. But if you have a common screen like a credit card screen or something else that you want to drive and share code, then absolutely the same XAML works everywhere. This thing that I showed you is actually, if you go look up Uno platform, you are going to find what they called a playground. And we'll give it a second. And where is it? Right here. So try this out. If you have ever done Silverlight, if you ever wanted to see XAML back in the browser, like Xamarin.Forms type XAML back in the browser, maybe the Windows XAML, this is going to show you XAML back in the browser. All of the UI will just work, and you can edit some of the XAML, and it works on the browser. So this is a good place to be, and I appreciate that. Okay, so let's go back to slides, because we talked about a lot of different things, and maybe it's confusing, but the point was to show you that it doesn't matter what technology stack you pick. The tools of your trade are great. If you are going to choose Xamarin.Forms, you are in a good place. If you're particularly for a .NET developer, your app just runs in so many different places now, and the tools will just keep on getting better, right? So yeah, let's do what is right. A couple of these are Microsoft slides. Yeah, let's change the world. Look at the ammunition we have as software developers to make the right software that delights the users. So let's go build stuff. And one more time, that's me. If you need to get hold of me, thank you so much for spending an hour and a half with me. Thank you, Chad, and everybody else for tuning in. I'll stop here and yeah, answer any questions you might have.
That was really good, Sam. I appreciate that. So, folks, any questions? One thing I have learned is everyone's shy until we get off of Twitch.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we all have stuff to do during our nights and weekends. So I appreciate you taking the time to just come and hang out with your fellow geeks, and we can all learn something together. So yeah, thank you, Chad. Thank you for hosting user groups and keeping us going.
So I was going to say, I mean, just to to clarify, and I know you talked about this, but so Maui will be in preview with 6 sometime by the end of the year, right?
Yeah.
I haven't seen a date. All I've seen is Scott say shortly after .NET 5 launches.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the official stance right now, because they are fighting a few battles, trying to make sure that XAML and C#, nothing really changes. Like the namespaces don't really change. And so if you have a Xamarin.Forms app today, there should not be much you have to do at all when it comes to Maui. But they are trying to be careful in how they bring in Blazor, how they bring in MVU, and making sure the performance stack doesn't get upset with some of the changes. But it is Xamarin.Forms under the covers.
That brings up a good question. So are they not getting rid of the Xamarin namespace?
Okay.
I know that was originally what we were talking about.
Yeah.
But obviously, I mean, because obviously if they do, that is a pretty big change.
It is, yeah. So and essentially what it means is like the Xamarin brand is gone, right? It's all .NET and it's all Maui now. And people obviously have like mixed feelings about this. Like it's been something that we have been using for such a long time. So essentially what it comes down to is like we use things like Xamarin.Essentials. That's a namespace that brings in all the APIs. And initially the idea was to just make it system.essentials. So it's part of .NET. So that's where there's a lot of pushback, and they promise like try convert tools which can take care of that by like automatically, but people don't want to let go of the Xamarin name and the namespace. So I think that is actually staying. And then for Blazor or for MVU, you just do the corresponding thing with the Xamarin namespace. Mm-hmm. But yeah, all of this is up in the air because it's being debated right now as we speak. But this is good because this gives us a long runway to make sure, like you cannot make everybody happy, but at least they're trying and they're listening.
I mean, I've played with Xamarin a couple of times over the years, but that was one of the things I thought was a smart idea, was actually bringing it into the system namespace. Because what I saw was, actually being able to do more stuff with it eventually.
Yeah.
I mean, they said that, the initial versions of Maui was not going to support Linux, but that was future state, right? It was actually be able to, that's kind of like the Holy Grail, right? If you ever look at the media, whenever they complain about, Microsoft's cross-platform, it's like, well, they can't do Linux, at least as an app, which I'm like, but I don't really need to do it as a regular app. But that was one of the things I was happy to see, that because I was like, well, that will finally give them the way to do that.
Yeah, and again, I mean, this can be a mixed bag, and to be honest, like if you have done Xamarin over the years, like it was painful. The tooling was not great, and you waited a lot for your dev cycle, and it in a ways it still is a little painful because just by nature of what we're doing, like you have to have latest iOS or latest Android. Because if you update Visual Studio, then things go out of sync because they're trying to support like 0-day updates from Apple and Google. So it's a tricky place to be, but that's just the nature of cross-platform dev.